Conservation has changed enormously in the last few decades. Once upon a time, we simply thought that all you needed to do was put animals in a national park, lock the door, walk away. Or we were much more invasive and we grabbed those animals, took them away from the impacts and put them in captivity or a zoo. Now we understand animal behaviour so much more and something about their ecology. We try not to be so invasive. What we're trying to do now is become much more innovative. This short film is about some of those real innovations in conservation practice today. Practical conservation in action.
So if you've ever had food poisoning, you'll understand exactly what our conservation project's about. If you've eaten a chicken curry and got really ill, I guarantee you that the next morning you won't be able to stand the sight or smell or taste of that food. You just won't want to go near it. And that's exactly what we've been doing with our quoll project. We've been making quolls sick to teach them not to eat cane toads. Quolls are voracious predators. They eat just about everything. They eat birds, small mammals, lizards and frogs. When cane toads invaded the Northern Territory, the quolls must have thought they'd won the lottery. Here's a giant frog that's super abundant and it's everywhere. But unfortunately for the quolls, the cane toads are very toxic and any quolls that attack toads die very quickly. And this meant that quoll populations crashed in the Northern Territory after toads invaded. Toads are everywhere. They're super abundant and they're really hard to get rid of. Lots of community groups have tried to get rid of cane toads and they've failed. I don't think there's a way we can stop the toads. But what we could do is change the behaviour of the quolls. Maybe we can teach them to live with toads. Maybe we can teach them to avoid eating cane toads. And that's where the food poisoning comes in. So our challenge was how to make the quolls sick and avoid eating cane toads without killing them. And to do this, we decided to make a toad sausage.
To make these cane toad sausages, we skin adult toad legs. We remove this skin because it can still contain some toxins. We then blend the toad legs. We also add a small amount of the chemical that induces nausea before putting them into a synthetic sausage skin.
Our quolls ate the sausages and became ill. And the next day, when we offered them a live toad, they associated the taste and smell of the toad with illness and they ignored the toads. And this was fantastic. It worked far better than we could have imagined. So my honours student Stephanie O'Donnell was working at the Territory Wildlife Park and she trained quolls not to eat cane toads. She then found that they were avoiding cane toads for up to a week in captivity, so the next step was to fit radio collars to those trained quolls, and Stephanie released them near Darwin, and she then radio tracked them to work out how long they were surviving for. And what Stephanie found was these trained toad-smart quolls survived for several weeks in the wild with cane toads. So they must have been remembering that cane toads were off the menu. And this was really exciting because it meant that we were able to train our quolls not to eat cane toads, and this aversion was long-lasting. The next step was to reintroduce 50 trained quolls to Kakadu National Park to see whether we could reverse this population decline. And the really interesting question for us was, would that toad aversion be passed on to the offspring?
Not only have our quolls survived after they were first released, they survived to breed, and 2 generations of their offspring have survived in the wild.
What we've found is that each generation of quolls is learning to avoid cane toads. We're not sure how this is happening. It could be that young quolls watch their mothers avoid toads and learn not to eat toads, or it could be that because mums never eat toads, young quolls just don't regard them as food. The other alternative is that perhaps young quolls encounter small non-lethal toads, which are very abundant in the landscape, and any quolls that eat little non-lethal toads will get sick, and that will kick in taste aversion learning, and they'll learn that way. So we don't know the mechanism, but what we do know is that every generation of quolls learns to avoid eating cane toads. We've been trapping quolls and Kakadu to see how long they survive, and by looking at the DNA from mothers and offspring, we've discovered that the offspring of our toad-smart mothers have also survived in the wild.
When we catch a quoll in our traps, not only do we take a small DNA sample, we also take some measurements from the quolls and we check their sex, and we have a small microchip so that we can check exactly who they are. We fitted juvenile quolls with a really small radio tracker collar. This collar was designed to break off if it got too tight, because that's one of the issues with collaring small animals. We would radio track the quolls to the sites of their dens, because quolls are mostly active at night. So we would track them to the sites of their dens to see not only who they were denning with, but whereabouts in the environment they were choosing to have their dens.
My PhD student Teigan Cremona has been radio tracking mums and babies, and what she's found is that even when they've left mum's den, young quolls are spending lots of time with their mothers. So this means that there's a great opportunity for young quolls to learn what to eat by watching what their mothers do. And we know that female quolls probably encounter toads every night and they just sniff and reject them. They're just part of the furniture. They're not on the menu. So potentially young quolls might learn what to eat by watching what their mothers do.
Before cane toads, there was as many as 55 quolls in our study site. Our population is sitting around between 15 and 20 quolls. So there are clearly other factors that are threatening quolls in the area, and we need to address these as well as the cane toad issue if we're to conserve the population and maintain it at the levels that it was before cane toad colonisation. We found that 3 out of our 4 quolls that died were actually killed by wild dogs, which pointed to the fact that wild dogs may be in fact more of a problem than cane toads. This wild dog problem is compounded by the fact that large areas of Kakadu are burnt very frequently. This reduces the amount of shelter, such as hollow logs and vegetation, that the animals can hide in, and leaves them really open to predators. We may need to intervene and add some artificial shelters, such as boulder piles or hollowed out termite mounds, so that when quolls are running through its open landscape, they could quickly duck into a shelter to avoid predation. Our research has addressed the cane toad threat, so what we need to look at is addressing those other threats: increased fire and wild dog predation, and also feral cat predation. If we can address these threats, quolls and a lot of the other small mammals that have been declining across Kakadu National Park would have a much better chance of survival.
We've been really lucky that this project has been so successful. It's a really good outcome. We can't get rid of cane toads, but we've been able to demonstrate that we can train the predators to avoid eating cane toads, and therefore they can live with the toads.
As the cane toad invasion front progresses westward, it's now approaching the Kimberley in Western Australia. And this area is rich with wildlife and is one of the last strongholds for the Northern Quoll. So it's extremely important that we protect these populations from a population crash caused by cane toad invasion.
Where we want to go next with this project is we'd like to be able to train wild quolls not to eat cane toads before the toads get there. And we think we can do this by putting toad sausages out in the landscape ahead of the toad invasion front.
We have completed a series of pilot studies looking at whether or not the quolls will eat these cane toad sausages. Our early results have been really successful, and it's pointed to the fact that we could develop these cane toad sausages further and actually deploy them aerially.
Wild quolls that eat those sausages will become ill, and we know that they'll subsequently avoid attacking cane toads. So we might be able to train them not to eat toads, and if we can do that, we might be able to save them from going extinct, and that would be a fantastic conservation outcome.
One of the really serious impacts that we are causing at the moment is to do with roads. Roads kill animals because they get run over, but they also prevent animals from moving from one side of the bush to the other. This, where we are standing at the moment, is in southern Brisbane, a place called Compton Road. And here is a fantastic solution to moving animals from one side of a busy road to the other. It's called the Compton Road Overpass or Land Bridge. Let's go and have a look. All around us is vegetation that's now about 6 or 7 years old. All of these trees and all this bush was all planted by people. And that's in order to try and have a continuous habitat from one side of the road over the overpass to the other side of the road. And you know what? It works fantastically well. This vegetation is around 6 years old and it's been going perfectly. The idea of overpasses over roads was primarily about mammals. We're trying to prevent things like wallabies and kangaroos from being killed in the road. So there's a fence, which we'll have a look at as well. Here, the fence goes around the edges of this overpass, and this is going to allow all the mammals to move clearly across. They were doing that within 3 weeks of this structure opening, and there was no vegetation at all at the time. But what we've really discovered that's really exciting lately is it's not just those mammals, the kangaroos and the small mammals, but other things like gliders, birds, reptiles and frogs are now all using this overpass. A few structures on the land bridge are specific to certain types of animals. And the best example would be the glider poles. The idea of this is that squirrel gliders, sugar gliders and even sometimes greater gliders cross this road using this structure which was just above me here. Before the trees had grown, this allowed the gliders to glide between the poles, but now the trees are large enough for them not to even use those poles. Another fantastic innovation that worked really well. One of the things that we truly didn't expect was that the birds would use it. We were really surprised to find that lots of small birds that live in the forest don't cross roads. It's not a big surprise when you start thinking about it. We're up to 28 species of birds, including grey fantails, which is just singing there in the background. Now, the really spectacular thing about the birds that I'm just personally so excited about, it was unexpected, and that it proves that we've reconnected severed populations. And it makes you realise just how many populations that don't have structures like this are now separate. They can't interact. It is a truly astonishing thing. We didn't even think about frogs, for example, but the richest species group on the whole of this land bridge, apart from the birds, is frogs. We've now got 12 species of frogs moving or living on this structure. Now that's extraordinary. The density of frogs and the species richness of frogs on this thing is greater than it is in the forest on either side. We don't know what it is, but we're doing something right. Wherever you go, you have a problem with people invading and causing damage. This fence that we're next to now, which is right on the top of the bridge, was originally built to prevent people on motorbikes and mountain bikes from getting access. It's no longer required because all the bush and vegetation has grown up and it's so thick that the people can't ride those bikes anywhere. But it's just one of those inevitable things that you have to keep people out sometimes. This is a special fence. We call it the Compton Road fence because this was the first place that it was used, but it's used all over the place in southern Queensland these days. It's an exclusion fence. It's to keep animals away from the road, and it continues across the land bridge in both places, both sides of the road. The features that matter are this big sheet of metal, so it prevents climbing animals like koalas or possums or gliders from getting up here. They simply can't get purchase on the metal and they won't be able to get across. It's also got this plastic that's embedded in the ground, and there's a few spaces where small animals can get through, but most of the time it's just a continuous plastic barrier so that small animals simply can't get through. The only thing that can really get through without any problems are the reptiles. Snakes and lizards just don't take any notice of any fence that we've ever come across. We were getting 15 to 30 animals killed every year. Koalas, kangaroos and wallabies. It's down to 3 in 7 years, so it's pretty good. And they only got through because some less than informed humans cut holes in the fence. And before they were patched up, the animals got through. So it kind of proves that the fences work. We're standing right at the top of the land bridge. So beneath us is about 70,000 cars per day passing through 2 tunnels that go under this very busy road. You can hear a faint hum of the traffic, but when you stand in the middle here, it's quite distant. We always thought there might be a problem with too much noise. It's not a problem. We worried about the lights. They've specially designed the lights at night so that they have reflectors going away from the bridge, so it's not badly lit. So and the animals have proved that they approve, because they're now crossing in ridiculously large numbers all the time. So there's no question that it works. We were worried about things like would certain species become territorial or occupy this top and not prevent other animals from going on. Hasn't happened. We were really worried about noisy miners from that perspective, because if noisy miners take over this small patch here, nothing else will get through. It hasn't happened. During 2005, we had a really ongoing serious drought. They put in thousands of trees here and we just thought they're all going to die. But they kept the water up to them. They had a trickle irrigation system to make sure that they at least got established and didn't just die during the drought. Now what was happening was, therefore, the whole of the landscape in this area was dry and drought-stricken, except for the overpass. And all that water and all that mulch just spontaneously allowed grass to grow like crazy. And the entire thing looked like a green hill in a brown landscape. So, I guess not surprisingly, every wallaby and kangaroo within a long way were just attracted to this place because of the gorgeous green grass that was available there. We think that was an inadvertent way of making a success early on. It got the animals used to coming to this new structure in their environment, and then after that they just did it all the time without any problem. There's no point in putting up a very expensive, elaborate structure like this unless there's a good reason, and there's a good reason here. We want animals to get across this road safely, not just rare animals, but ordinary animals, because the only way that the animal communities on either side can function continuously and be safe from threats of extinction is that they continue to move. The only reason that this exists was because there's a local community group, a conservation group, who are really, really upset about the fact that the road, Compton Road, was going to be upgraded from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. And they said, we really oppose that. You've got to make sure that the road has less impact than it already is happening. And that's the reason that this place is so famous now, because Compton Road, this 1 kilometre stretch of road that bisects 2 beautiful forests, now has more structures for animals to cross than anywhere else in the world. As well as this overpass, which has glider poles, there are 3 rope ladders for gliders and possums, and 2 enormous purpose-built underpasses. And that, all in one place, is the richest environment for crossing roads safely than anywhere else in the world.
I am Tim Faulkner. My role is General Manager of Devil Ark, and I'm here today to talk about all things devils. And my main role is with the insurance population side of things with the Devil program, but a bit of back history is that this exists because of devil facial tumour disease. It was found in the northeast of Tasmania at Mount William National Park in 1996 by an amateur photographer. Now, he photographed devils who had these gross lesions and tumours that basically enveloped the lips, eyes, nose. That was the first time it was seen. So the stats now are that basically it's covered 80 to 90% of the state. Basically, I understand that devils suffer from a lack of genetic diversity. When one devil bites another, it transfers the cells directly into the other devil. And I think the simple term is that the other devil doesn't recognise it. Its body doesn't see it as a foreign cell. It accepts it, nurtures it, grows it, and in turn contracts the disease. It appears always to be fatal by 6 months, generally by 3 months. The way things are going, it's estimated that devils could become extinct somewhere between 5, 15, 20 years in the wild. The habitat's pristine. There's no feral pests that are sending them to extinction. So the environment generally and the circumstances are okay. It's this disease. And so if we can just see the disease out or eradicate it, hypothetically, the devil can go back into an environment. And that's quite a nice thing to know. And that leads me into why and how the reptile park got involved and where Devil Ark came from. The reptile park is a medium-sized, privately run wildlife park. We do many different things for conservation, but we pick particular species. The devils we love because we saw a species that wasn't suffering from habitat destruction, wasn't suffering from urban sprawl, wasn't suffering from feral pests. And if we can keep them safe in captivity for long enough, we may be able to play a really serious role here. So that's how we went forward. And in 2003, Reptile Park, along with a bunch of other zoos, and the ZAA, the Zoo and Aquaria Association of Australasia, got together and, hey, there's a problem, identified it, what are we going to do? A number of zoos got on board. And in 2006, the Reptile Park received our first Tasmanian devils as part of the insurance population. We did exceedingly well and we bred a lot of devils, but come 2009, 10, we're full. And basically, that was the problem that was going to happen throughout the zoo industry. So that led us down a path of, what are we going to do? The geneticists and the models told us that it's a numbers game. We need more devils, thousands, not hundreds. And that was the creation of Devil Ark. We found the appropriate property in the most perfect part of mainland Australia you could hope for. It's high in the Barrington Tops, an alpine area of New South Wales. It's just like a slice of Tasmania. Now the land was donated to us by the Packer family and is part of Elliston Station. It's 500 hectares and very Tasmania-like. So importantly, a big part of what we were looking for and the difference between intensive management and the management at Devil Ark is that in a zoo-type environment, you run the risk of losing some of those wild behavioural traits. Now, over time, if we're going to keep these animals in captivity for the purpose of release, they must behave like wild devils. So, we take a slice of the environment, we fence it in, we provide food and water and nothing else. And that means, long term, they'll be wild devils. The big cost is in the setup. I mean, generally, conservation is critically important, but it's expensive. Now, devils are terrors. They dig, they climb, they chew. A devil, you've got to cover all bases. So the fences are very elaborate. Stage 1 was about 6 kilometres of fence. That's both a perimeter fence and an internal fence because the enclosure fence, if it's ever breached, then you've still got the perimeter fence. That was set up in 2010, took 6 months to build. There was enormous amounts of road building, fence building, and the fences, as I say, very elaborate. Big trenches, clearing, aprons, high fences, barbed wire, hot wire, tin. And in Christmas 2010, the first 47 devils arrived in the Barrington Tops. Probably for the first time in 500 years were devils heard again in Barrington Tops because we know they used to be there some time ago, so that was a pretty special moment. They only arrived 2 months before their breeding season. And out of the 47 founders, that whole population wasn't just breeding stock. That meant there were young devils, old devils, and then males and females that could breed. So we had wonderful success. 75% of the possible females, they did breed. The joeys survived. They made it through to weaning and then were removed from the yards and put into their own creche yards. And you know, pioneer work like this, the reality was that we didn't know if it would work, and it did. Inside each enclosure is, like I say, a little natural slice of habitat. Now, there are old vacated wombat burrows, and the females always choose them as maternal dens. We've provided opportunities, big piles of dirt that have been piled up on fallen trees, and the devils love them. They go in at the buttress of the tree and dig their own burrows. And then, of course, they can dig their own natural burrows. But these enclosures, we're talking that the smallest enclosure is the size of a couple of football fields. The biggest grows by about 3 times that. We have 500 hectares. We don't want to just throw 100 devils in there because genetically that's silly. We can't control who's mating with who. They're already genetically impoverished. We just get a stud male that mates with too many females and the gene pool shrinks again. So what we want is groups of 8, and we can manage it and interchange. That's what we have there, a natural environment big enough that they can display natural behaviours. That sees us in 2014 with 180 Tasmanian devils, and heading into the next breeding season, we'd expect to have another 35 to 40 joeys born. What's there now is a model. There's close to 15 of the free range or managed environmental enclosures, and that now is a model that turns over. In the first few years it was difficult because there were no old devils that were dying because the population was young. That meant we had to expand rapidly. What we've got now is we've got appropriate environmental enclosures for young devils that are being creached, learning how to be devils. We've got enclosures for the breeding population, and now we've got enclosures for the retirees because we see them right through their lives. But basically now we know that this model can have 35 to 40 devils born and 35 to 40 devils naturally pass away at 6 or 7 years old, which is their life expectancy. People have the wrong ideas about devils. A devil in a typical zoo-type environment gets all the love and care in the world, but what it also gets is a lot of contact with humans. Now, that turns it from its wild state, and its wild state, believe it or not, is very shy, very timid, very elusive, and in fact freezes upon contact with humans. You can just hold a devil there. It's because it's very scared. It's not that it's that loving, but they're so quiet. But when you bring a devil into a captive environment, and you know, we have to have contact with them because we need to treat them, make sure they're okay, ensure they're eating their food. But the devils can turn into little buggers, little monsters. And so what happens there is people tend to imagine a devil that's drooling and, you know, growling, and that's not the devil that I know, and that's not the real devil. The real devil is a really gentle creature, and as a keeper, they're very stimulating to work with because they each have their own personalities. They each have different temperaments and characters. I do love all marsupials, but devils tend to stand above many of the others in terms of their individual aspects. We're on target for our goal of 350 devils by 2016, but the infrastructure that's there now, it's full at 180 devils, so we must expand. The reality is that it's a conservation project. The reptile park has put in vast amounts of funding and are continuing to do so, but we can't do it by ourselves. Fencing is very expensive, conservation generally is expensive, and depending on the help that we're able to get will depend on our success towards that goal and how quickly we get there. What we know is that we can research an animal until the day of its extinction, but wouldn't it be nice to have enough of them in captivity to make sure that we can still put them back to the wild? Just sitting here, I look across the wall in my office and there's a picture there, and it's there as a reminder, and it reminds me of the most beautiful animal ever to have become extinct, and that is the Tassie tiger or thylacine. And at the end of the day, that is what we're making sure doesn't happen to the devil.
We've been exploring some of the really innovative ways that we've been trying to do conservation in Australia just recently. And it's all about understanding the animals in great detail, really understanding their behaviour and their ecology. And that has made an enormous difference to the way that conservation is practiced. One of the critical components of success in conservation these days is getting the community right behind you. Education is unavoidably and absolutely essential if we're going to get anywhere with this. So this film, we hope, has illustrated just some of the ways and some of the new things that are going on in conservation today.